Hello, Wide Real News followers. Welcome back, and don't forget to subscribe so you can keep receiving timely and important news from us. Today, we are covering the growing crisis in Mozambique, where the country is caught in a storm of protests, escalating violence, and an increasingly repressive government response. Background on the protest: Mozambique has been experiencing widespread protests following the October 9th general election, which the ruling party, Frelimo, claimed to have won by a large margin with Daniel Chopo as its candidate. However, opposition leaders, civil society groups, and even international observers have questioned the election's legitimacy. Many believe Venancio Mondlane, an independent candidate who previously broke away from the opposition party Frelimo, won the majority of votes. Mondlane and his supporters argued that the election was marred by fraud, and they have called for nationwide protests to challenge the result and demand electoral justice. Mondlane, who has been in exile since leaving the country due to security concerns, continues to call for the fight against electoral fraud and has urged his followers to remain vigilant. Using social media platforms like Facebook, he has coordinated these demonstrations, encouraging gatherings at strategic locations such as ports, border posts, and major cities. He insists that the protest will not stop until there is restoration of electoral truth and an end to the violence and abductions of opposition supporters. Violence and losses: the Mozambican government has responded to these protests with significant force, leading to a tragic loss of life. Reports indicate that at least 40 people have died in the clashes. Police have employed tear gas, rubber bullets, and, in some cases, live ammunition to disperse the crowds, leading to further outrage and fueling the protests. The violence isn't just affecting the protesters, it's also taking a toll on the economy. Businesses, especially those linked to tourism, have suffered as a result of the turmoil. According to the Center for Public Integrity, CPI, Mozambique has lost around 2% of its GDP due to the ongoing unrest. Mohamed Abdullah, a representative for Mozambique's hotels and tourism industry, has reported widespread booking cancellations as international tourists avoid the country, fearing for their safety. Impact on trade and daily life: the demonstrations have also led to logistical disruptions. For instance, truck drivers at the Resano-Garcia border with South Africa have been instructed by opposition leaders to use their vehicles to block roads. This has resulted in the partial closure of the border at times, cutting off an essential trade route for food and other supplies. Mozambique relies heavily on imports from South Africa, and the blockade has caused food shortages in the country's southern regions. The Mozambican Tax Authority has expressed concerns over the supply issues, as the ongoing blockade affects the flow of essential goods into the country. While some Mozambicans have tried to return home through border openings, the situation remains precarious. Social unrest and demands for change: Mondlane has made it clear that these protests are about more than just an election. They represent a demand for justice and dignity. This movement is a cry against the erosion of life's basic dignity, the plague of corruption, and the growth of criminal networks that have turned Mozambique into a drug trafficking crossroads, stated Johan Viljoen, director of the Dennis Ali Peace Institute, DHBI. In a recent statement, the Catholic bishops of Mozambique condemned the government's response to the protest, describing it as a lie that undermines the people's right to vote. They criticized the government for shutting down internet services in certain areas, which has severely impacted communication and coordination among protesters. The DHBI statement called this a digital apartheid, designed to isolate and silence marginalized communities where opposition to Frelimo is strongest. International responses: the protests have also drawn international attention. Demonstrations in solidarity with Mozambican citizens have taken place outside Mozambican embassies in countries such as Angola, Brazil, and Portugal. These countries are critical players for Mozambique, particularly Portugal, which has close historical ties as a former colonial power. Portuguese opposition leaders have raised the issue in their parliament, questioning the government's stance on Mozambique's unrest. In response to the crisis, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, plans to discuss Mozambique's situation in the coming week. South Africa, a key member of SADC, has taken a particular interest in the situation. South African Minister of International Relations Ronald Lamola emphasized the need for calm, calling on the Mozambican government to settle the dispute in court and to investigate the deaths of opposition supporters. Pope Francis also spoke on the situation during his Angelus prayer, urging Mozambique's leaders to pursue dialogue and peaceful solutions. He called on the global community to pray for the entire Mozambican population and emphasized the importance of maintaining faith in democracy and justice. His message has resonated with many Mozambicans who look to international voices for support as they seek a path to peace and fair governance. Economic consequences. The ongoing unrest is having a devastating effect on Mozambique's economy, particularly its tourism sector, which had been a promising source of income before the protests. The Tourism Confidence Index has plummeted and numerous bookings have been cancelled. Local businesses are struggling to survive amidst the instability. The violence and economic downturn have left the country's prospects bleak, and experts warn that the situation could worsen if a resolution isn't reached soon. Calls for government reform. In their November 8 letter, Southern African Catholic bishops urged Mozambique to consider more inclusive governance. They suggested a possible government of national unity to allow for collaboration across political lines, which would address the core grievances that led to the protests. The bishops also called for Mozambique's electoral processes to be overseen by independent institutions to ensure transparency and credibility. Looking ahead, as tensions continue to mount, Mozambicans face an uncertain future. For now, Mondlane remains committed to the cause, insisting that his followers must remain peaceful and avoid acts of vandalism. He has asked his supporters to be patient and resilient as hope for a victory is near. His influence has rallied Mozambicans across the country and even abroad, uniting them in a common goal for reform. The situation in Mozambique serves as a stark reminder of the importance of democracy, transparency, and accountability. It highlights the power of collective action and the risks that people are willing to take for justice. As the country awaits the upcoming SADC meeting, the world watches closely to see whether these demonstrations will pave the way for meaningful change or if the cycle of repression and unrest will continue. Thank you for staying with us for this detailed report on Mozambique's struggle for democracy. Please make sure to subscribe to Wide Real News to keep receiving in-depth and accurate news coverage on critical issues around the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.